He was never supposed to rule the largest land empire in history. He wasn't the son of Genghis Khan, he was his grandson, one of dozens fighting for scraps of power. Yet this one man would do something no nomad had ever done before: conquer and then rule the oldest and most sophisticated civilization on Earth, China. His name was Kublai Khan, and this is how a Mongol warrior became a Chinese emperor. If stories like this are your thing, hit subscribe now, because we're about to go deep into the Mongol Empire's most fascinating chapter, and you won't want to miss what's coming. Kublai was born in 1215, one of many grandsons of Genghis Khan through his fourth son, Talyui. Unlike most Mongol princes raised purely for war, Kublai's mother, Sorkhoktani, a fiercely intelligent and politically sharp woman, made sure her sons were educated broadly, exposed to Chinese scholars, Buddhist monks, and administrators from the settled civilizations the Mongols had already conquered. This upbringing set Kublai apart from the beginning. While other Mongol nobles saw conquered peoples purely as sources of tribute and plunder, Kublai grew genuinely curious about how these civilizations actually worked. Their governments, their philosophies, their farming systems, their cities. By the time he reached adulthood, he was already administering Mongol territories in northern China on behalf of his older brother, Mongol Khan, gaining first-hand experience governing a settled population rather than simply raiding one. It was rare training for a Mongol prince, and it would define everything that came after. In 1259, Kublai's brother, the reigning Great Khan monk, died suddenly during a military campaign in China. Under Mongol tradition, succession was supposed to be decided by a Kurultai, a grand assembly of nobles. But two brothers claimed the throne almost simultaneously: Kublai, commanding forces in China, and their younger brother Erik Bok, who held the traditional Mongol capital of Karakoram and the support of many conservative nobles who saw Kublai as too influenced by foreign, settled cultures. What followed was a brutal civil war between brothers, a war for the very soul of the Mongol Empire. Would it remain a purely nomadic warrior state centered on the steppe, or evolve into something new, a hybrid empire ruling over vast farming civilizations? Kublai's superior resources, wealth, and control over Chinese territory gave him the advantage. By 1264, Erik Bok surrendered, and Kublai stood as the undisputed Great Khan. But the war had cost the empire its unity. Several western Mongol territories, including the Golden Horde and the Ilkhanate, effectively broke away as independent Mongol states. Kublai now ruled the largest and richest piece of the empire, but no longer the whole thing. Northern China had already fallen to the Mongols decades earlier. But southern China, ruled by the wealthy, sophisticated Song dynasty, was considered nearly impossible to conquer. The Song had massive walled cities, a powerful navy, and a landscape of rivers, rice paddies, and mountains that neutralized the Mongols' greatest weapon, their cavalry. Kublai refused to give up. The siege of the fortress city of Xiangyang alone dragged on for nearly 6 years, forcing the Mongols to bring in Persian and Muslim engineers to build massive new siege weapons capable of breaking the city's defenses. Kublai also did something almost no Mongol leader before him had prioritized. He built an entire navy from scratch, training Mongol and Chinese sailors to fight on rivers and open water. Piece by piece, southern China fell. The campaign finally ended in 1279 at the naval battle of Yamen, where the last Song loyalists were decisively crushed. For the first time in history, all of China, north and south, was united under a single ruler. And that ruler was a Mongol. Even before finishing the conquest, Kublai made a historic decision. In 1271 he declared the founding of a new Chinese dynasty, the Yuan dynasty, positioning himself not just as a foreign conqueror, but as a legitimate Chinese emperor within China's own imperial tradition. He built a magnificent new capital, Dadu, on the site of what is now Beijing, blending Mongol governance with Chinese bureaucratic systems. Kublai employed Chinese officials, Muslim administrators, and Mongol nobles side by side, creating a layered social system where Mongols held the top positions of power, but Chinese scholars and craftsmen still ran much of the actual administration. He rebuilt and extended the Grand Canal, improved roads, and promoted trade and agriculture across the empire. It was an extraordinary balancing act, ruling China as a nomadic outsider while presenting himself as heir to its ancient throne. It was during Kublai's reign that China truly opened up to the wider world, and no story captures this better than that of a young Venetian traveler named Marco Polo. Arriving at Kublai's court after an epic overland journey along the Silk Road, Marco Polo reportedly spent years serving under the Khan, later writing an account of his travels describing a China far wealthier, more advanced, and more organized than anything Europeans could imagine. Gleaming cities, paper money, efficient postal systems, and a royal court of almost unimaginable splendor. Whether every detail of his account was accurate remains debated by historians, but its impact wasn't. It introduced China to the European imagination for centuries to come, and it captured something true about Kublai's court, a place where Mongols, Chinese, Persians and Europeans all crossed paths under the protection of the Pax Mongolica. Kublai's ambitions didn't stop at China's borders, and this is where his story takes a darker turn. Twice, in 1274 and again in 1281, he launched massive naval invasions of Japan. Both times, his fleets were devastated by sudden, violent typhoons that the Japanese would later call kamikaze, divine wind, destroying thousands of ships and ending any hope of conquering the island nation. He also launched costly invasions into Vietnam and Java, both of which ultimately failed due to disease, difficult terrain and fierce local resistance. These defeats revealed the limits of Mongol power. The same empire that had conquered the impossible Song dynasty found itself unable to cross open water or fight effectively in dense tropical jungles. Kublai's later years were increasingly defined by these expensive, unsuccessful campaigns, draining the treasury he had built. As Kublai aged, he suffered personal tragedies, the death of his beloved wife, Chabi, and later his chosen heir, and reportedly turned to overeating and heavy drinking, his health declining along with his once legendary energy. He died in 1294, having ruled longer and more successfully than almost any Mongol leader in history. But the Yuan dynasty he built didn't survive him for long. Weak successors, factional infighting, and growing resentment among the Chinese population toward Mongol rule eventually led to rebellion. By 1368, less than a century after Kublai's death, the Yuan dynasty was overthrown, and the Ming dynasty rose in its place. Yet Kublai's true legacy endured far beyond his dynasty's fall. He had proven for the first time in history that a nomadic warrior could conquer, govern, and legitimately rule one of the world's oldest and most advanced civilizations, reshaping the map of Asia and the flow of world history forever. Kublai Khan proved that a nomad could rule the world's oldest civilization. But the Mongol story doesn't end here. His cousin Hulagu conquered Baghdad. Another cousin ruled the Golden Horde. If you want to see the full Mongol saga, subscribe and hit the bell. Next, the man who burned Baghdad, Hulagu Khan.